Seizing central space opens avenues for rapid development and future queenside expansion. Unlocking central squares, the knight boldly contests space and prepares for dynamic responses. Commanding the center and preparing to seize initiative, white stakes a claim for space with this pawn advance. Embracing a solid central pawn structure, black prepares to develop their pieces harmoniously and contest white's space. Developing the knight to c3 solidifies central control and prepares for further piece activity. Pinning the knight immediately stakes a claim on the center and prepares to challenge white's development. Solidifying the center pawn structure potentially weakens the dark squares around the king. Challenging white's central pawn structure, black opens lines and contests space in the heart of the board. Asserting queenside space with this pawn push aims to dissuade black's bishop from its active diagonal, potentially hindering piece coordination and forcing a tactical reevaluation. Consolidating development, the bishop relocates to a safer, yet still influential, square preparing for potential castling. Prying open the center with this pawn thrust creates significant tension and demands immediate strategic decisions from black regarding pawn structure and piece activity. Accepting the pawn gambit releases central tension, creating immediate pawn imbalances. Fortifying the center and preparing for a pawn push while aiming to develop pieces harmoniously. Safely tucked away, the king now enjoys the sanctuary of its castled position, allowing for smoother development. Capturing the pawn solidifies central control and aims to open lines against black's king. Solidifying the central pawn structure, the knight finds a more active square, aiming to support potential central breaks. Developing the knight to a more central outpost, preparing for kingside castling and potential pawn breaks. Challenging white's central pawn structure, this move opens lines and aims to disrupt white's harmony. Finally, king's safety secured amidst this evolving pawn structure. This move shores up the queenside pawn structure, preventing an immediate advance of white's b-pawn and preparing for potential queenside counterplay. Pushing the pawn forward creates immediate central tension, forcing black to react and potentially freeing up attacking lines for white's pieces. Anchoring the knight to e8 secures its retreat and prepares a potential kingside pawn storm or a central breakthrough with f5. Launching a pawn offensive, white aims to seize central territory and restrict black's developing pieces. Establishing the knight on a more active outpost, preparing potential kingside pressure and opening lines. Striking the pawn opens a diagonal for white's queen, potentially disrupting black's cramped kingside. Reclaiming the pawn opens dynamic central lines, forcing a precise response to avoid piece imbalances. Aggressively expanding on the queenside, this pawn thrust aims to pry open lines for white's pieces while simultaneously restricting black's central mobility. Challenging white's queenside expansion, black solidifies their pawn structure, creating a formidable barrier and preparing for counterplay. Capturing the pawn simplifies the position, but opens up the queenside for black's counterplay. Sacrificing the pawn here initiates a dynamic counterplay along the open a file, aiming to disrupt white's queenside structure and create attacking chances. Sacrificing the bishop aims to disrupt black's pawn structure and seize the initiative. Capturing the bishop opens a critical diagonal for your queen, putting immediate pressure on white's king. Securing the central pawn advance, white embraces a doubled pawn structure for improved pawn mass and activity, aiming to exploit open lines. Activating the bishop on b7 offers valuable counterplay, aiming to exploit the weakened dark squares and challenge white's central control. Initiating an endgame exchange by removing central tension, white aims to simplify and exploit the opened queen file. Clearing the f file for the rook opens up aggressive possibilities along that critical avenue. Opening the central file now offers white an aggressive advantage and prepares to activate the king's rook for the endgame battle. This knight's relocation opens a pathway for the c8 rook to join the game, aiming to disrupt white's central control. Reclaiming the pawn solidifies your central influence and opens crucial lines for your rooks. Recapturing the pawn on c5 opens up lines for your pieces, aiming to exploit the weakened queenside structure created by white's doubled pawns. Forcing a king and rook endgame where white's passed pawn might become a decisive factor. Reclaiming the central file with the rook solidifies black's endgame prospects and offers counterplay. Suddenly, the knight springs to life, dominating the center and eyeing vulnerable pawns. This move desperately attempts to activate the bishop, but it's a misplaced piece in this open position. Reclaiming a pawn while centralizing the knight aims to disrupt black's active piece placement. Addressing potential pawn weaknesses ahead of the king is a prudent defensive measure, preventing future infiltration by the enemy knight. Unleashing a knight to harass the queenside pawn structure, aiming to disrupt black's coordination and create attacking possibilities. Consolidating pieces and preparing for further action along the open file, this seeks to reactivate the rook and improve its posting. Securing open space, this pawn advance initiates a crucial battle for control of the queenside territory. Unleashing a kingside pawn storm, black gambles for activity and breaks open lines, hoping to exploit white's slightly passive piece placement. Opening the f-file unleashes immediate tactical possibilities for your rooks. Reclaiming the pawn opens a central file, but it's a fight for the last breath. Black must actively challenge white's centralized knights. Pressuring the queenside, white aims to sever black's connections and potentially create a passed pawn. Securing the king's escape square is paramount here as activity on the queenside intensifies. Asserting control over the crucial central file, white aims to restrict black's rook activity and consolidate their material advantage. Invading the 7th rank with the knight creates immediate pressure on white's advanced pawn. Reinforcing the rook on the semi-open file creates immediate pressure and prepares to exploit the open c-file. A bold attempt to disrupt white's pieces, but it leaves black's king slightly exposed. Targeting the isolated pawn, this rook now actively pressures the queenside. Surrendering the open file concedes a crucial advantage. Prepare for a tough endgame defense. Pouncing on the loose knight, white initiates a decisive queen and rook liquidation, heading toward a winning material advantage and simplified endgame. Finally bringing that bishop to a more active square, threatening to infiltrate the queenside pawns and potentially disrupt white's coordination. Reclaiming the outpost, white aims to exploit the weak d-pawn and secure crucial central control. Initiating pawn liberation on the kingside, aiming to disrupt white's central control and activate the king's defense. Reclaiming the outpost with the knight revitalizes piece activity and prepares for a potential kingside push. Reconnecting the bishop to its brethren promises improved coordination, but the cramped king still feels exposed. Unleashing a pawn to seal off the queen's final outpost, opening pathways for your rook. Sensing opportunity, black boldly injects life into the game by centralizing the knight, ready to disrupt white's coordinated pieces. Pushing the passed pawn forward creates a decisive race against the clock for black's king. Securing the crucial 7th rank with the knight now gives black a better chance to consolidate. Initiating a pawn endgame with decisive material advantage, aiming to isolate and capture the remaining pieces. Reclaiming the central square allows the knight to potentially disrupt white's pawn push and prepare for a counterattack. Reclaiming the outpost with the knight, white eyes the weakened c7 pawn and prepares to dominate the d-file. Unleashing the bishop to h4 offers a dynamic counterplay, eyeing the critical c2 square and potentially creating threats against the white king. Pouncing on the now exposed dark squares, this knight forces a positional retreat for black's bishop. Repositioning the knight to b6 aims to secure the bishop on a6 and prepare for potential counterplay on the queen side. Repositioning the knight to c5 aims to disrupt black's pawn structure and create new attacking possibilities. Redeploying the bishop to this square offers better defensive coverage against potential infiltration on the c-file, consolidating black's position. Exploiting a loose king, This fork disrupts black's coordination and regains material, forcing a favorable endgame.